Have you ever walked through a city so still that it seemed to be holding its breath, not out of fear, but out of reverence, as though the very air had paused to listen for something just beyond the edge of sound? Tonight, we walk together through that kind of silence, into the heart of London in the year 1666, a city woven from timber and candlelight, where time moved not by clocks, but by the chime of church bells and the quiet turning of the tide. Close your eyes now, not because darkness awaits, but because light of another kind is about to rise within your mind, the soft, amber glow of lanterns swaying in the evening breeze, the gentle warmth of cobblestones still holding the memory of a long summer's day, the faint scent of wood smoke drifting through narrow alleys like a whispered prayer. Let your breath settle into the rhythm of the river, steady and unhurried, as if your body has always known this place, as if your pulse has always echoed the heartbeat of these ancient streets. The air tonight is layered with stories, the sweet, yeasty perfume of bread still rising in ovens along Pudding Lane, the sharper tang of hearth smoke curling from 100 chimneys, the cool, mineral breath of the Thames below, carrying with it the salt of distant shores and the soft lapping of boats at rest. A dog barks once, drowsily, from a courtyard behind a timber-bird wall, its voice not urgent, but part of the night's gentle symphony. A door closes softly, its latch clicking like a comma in a sentence written long ago. Far off, the bell of St. Magnus the Martyr tolls the hour, its sound rolling across rooftops and settling on the water like a memory returning home. London is falling asleep, not all at once, but in waves like ripples spreading from a single dropped stone. In the upper rooms of leaning houses, families draw shutters closed, fingers brushing the rough grain of oak worn smooth by generations of hands. Candles are lit, their flames cupped protectively in glass lanterns hung outside doors, tiny beacons against the gathering dark. Inside, the light pools on wooden floors, on pewter mugs, on the open pages of prayer books turned to familiar verses. A mother smooths the hair from her child's forehead. A sailor checks the knots on a rope coiled beside his bed. A baker's apprentice yawns as he stirs the embers in the oven one last time, his thoughts already drifting toward dreams. The city is alive in its stillness. Along the riverbank, small boats rock gently at their moorings, their ropes creaking in soft conversation with the current. The water is black and mirror-smooth in places, broken only by the slow swirl of an eddy or the ripple left by a passing rat. Above, the sky deepens from indigo to velvet, and the first stars appear not bright at first, but tentative, as though even the heavens hesitate to disturb such quietude. Their light trembles across the surface of the Thames, fractured and multiplied, until the river seems to hold 1,000 tiny lanterns within its depths. Look up. The houses lean toward one another, their upper stories nearly touching, so close that neighbors can trade bread across the alleyways, call warnings or greetings without raising their voices, reach out through open windows to steady a tilting flower pot or catch a falling glove. The wood is dark, rich with age and smoke, its beams carved in places with initials, dates, tiny crosses, a quiet language of love and survival etched by hands long gone. Ivy clings to the walls, its leaves still warm from the day, exhaling the last of the sun's heat into the cooling air. From the eaves, swallows dart in swift, silent arcs, returning to nests tucked beneath the thatch, their wings brushing the silence like fingers across a harp string. This is a city built not on stone alone, but on proximity, on the knowledge that no one is ever truly alone here. A cough in one house is heard in the next. A song begun in a tavern spills into the street and is taken up by a passerby. A cry in the night brings lanterns to windows before the echo has faded. London breathes as one body tonight, slow, deep, trusting. Few among its people know, how could they, that this peace is balanced on the thinnest edge of fate, that the very things that make the city feel safe, the closeness of the houses, the dryness of the wood, the wind that carries smells and songs from one lane to another, are also the things that will feed a fire with terrifying hunger. In the bakery on Pudding Lane, the coals glow red in the belly of the oven, banked for the night, but not yet cold. The apprentice has swept the floor, stacked the last of the loaves on the cooling rack, and blown out the candle by the door. His bed is a thin pallet near the hearth, and as he lies down, the warmth of the embers wraps around him like a blanket. He does not see the single spark that escapes as he closes the oven door, a tiny, living ember, no larger than a grain of barley, that drifts downward, lands in a pile of dry sawdust, and glows there, quietly, patiently, like a secret waiting to be spoken. Merchants tally their accounts by candlelight, their ledgers filled with ink-smudged figures that tell stories of wool and wine, of spice brought from the Indies, of debts paid and promises kept. Sailors mend nets by the riverside, their fingers moving with the rhythm of tides they know by heart. In a small room above a chandler's shop, a woman stitches by lamplight, her needle pulling thread through linen with a soft, regular shush-shush that matches the turning of the world outside. Everything feels eternal. The same bells will ring at dawn. The same gulls will cry over the fish market. The same bread will warm the same hands. London has stood for centuries through plague, through war, through kings who rose and fell like seasons, and it feels tonight as though it will stand forever. And yet, even the greatest cities are built upon moments like this one. Moments of stillness before change, not the calm after the storm, but the calm before it, the deep, suspended breath in which everything is possible and nothing is certain. This night is not the end. It is the threshold. As you stand at the edge of this moment, let yourself settle deeper, not into tension, but into presence. Notice how your shoulders soften, how your breath lengthens, how the world outside your window begins to blur at the edges, until all that remains is the sound of this voice, the rhythm of the river, the quiet pulse of a city on the verge of transformation. If you wish, you may share where in time or where in the world you are listening from, whether you're curled beneath a blanket in a room lit by electric light, or lying in a cabin where the wind hums through the trees, or even drifting in that tender space between waking and sleep, and I will hold your presence as part of this night's vigil, another quiet light in the constellation of those who remember. If you would like to return for another journey through history and dreams, to walk the streets of ancient Athens at dawn, to stand beside Galileo as he lifts his telescope to the sky, to hear the whispers of Babylon beneath the stars follow this channel, there is no urgency, no demand, only an open door and a promise that when you are ready, another story will be waiting. For now, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts settle like dust on a sunlit sill. Feel the warmth of the lanterns at your back, the coolness of the river at your side, the quiet weight of the city around you. This is London not yet burning, not yet broken, not yet reborn, just breathing, slow and deep, its chest rising and falling with the rhythm of the river, its pulse humming in the creak of timber-bird walls, and the soft glow of lanterns swaying in the evening breeze. And in that breath, steady and ancient, our story begins. The first light of morning spreads across London not with fanfare, but with the quiet insistence of something ancient and familiar, the kind of light that has touched these streets for centuries, rising softly over the rooftops, like a hand laid gently on a sleeping child's forehead. It glides across chimneys of brick and clay, slips through the narrow gaps between timber-framed houses, and settles on cobblestones still damp from the night's dew. The city begins to stir, not with urgency, but with the slow, unhurried rhythm of a body, remembering how to breathe after rest. Smoke rises in delicate spirals from 1,000 hearths, each thread a quiet signature of a life waking. It mingles with the mist that curls upward from the Thames, a silvery veil that softens the edges of warehouses, bridges, and spires. The air carries the scent of damp wood and warm ash, of hay stacked in stables, of coal just lit in iron grates. Beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, is the sweetness of bread-rich, yeasty, golden drifting from ovens deep in the heart of the city, where the night's last embers still glow. It is Sunday, and the city moves with reverence. The bells of St. Margaret's toll slowly, their bronze voices rolling over the rooftops like waves over stone. A baker draws his shutters, open with a soft creak, the wood swollen from summer's humidity. A milkmaid balances a yoke across her shoulders, the pails swaying gently as she walks, their surface trembling with each step. Horses clop along the lanes, their breath visible in the cool air, hooves striking sparks faintly against the flint set into the cobbles. The sounds do not clash, they layer, one upon another, forming a quiet symphony of survival, of continuity. The streets are narrow, intimate, almost tender in their closeness. Houses lean toward each other, as though sharing secrets, their upper stories nearly touching, the space between them so narrow that a woman hanging laundry can reach across to hand a clothespin to her neighbor without raising her voice. Timber beams, dark with age and smoke, form intricate patterns across the facades, some carved with initials, others with dates now worn smooth, others still with tiny crosses traced by fingers long gone. Ivy clings to the walls in places, its leaves glistening with dew, exhaling the last coolness of night into the warming air. Ropes strung between windows sway gently in the breeze, hung with sheets and shirts that flutter like pale banners. Below, apprentices sweep sawdust and straw from doorsteps, their brooms whispering against the stone. A cobbler sits on his stool, hammer in hand, his eyes fixed on the curve of a half-finished shoe. A fishmonger arranges his wares on a wooden slab silver herring, pink salmon, eels coiled like ribbons of shadow, his hands quick and sure, his voice sharp and melodic as he calls his prices to passing housewives. Life here is not grand, but it is deep. Every gesture has weight. The way a butcher wraps a joint of beef in paper tied with twine. The way a seamstress threads her needle with a flick of her wrist. The way a child pauses to watch a beetle crawl across a sunlit step before continuing on her errand. These are not moments meant for history books. They are the quiet pulse of a city that believes, with quiet certainty, in its own tomorrow. Along the river, the morning sun catches the masts of moored ships, turning the Thames into a slow-moving river of light. Dock workers haul sacks of grain, barrels of wine, bales of wool, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of trade that binds London to the world. Gulls wheel overhead, their cries sharp and bright against the low hum of conversation. The river is not just water. It is the city's breath, its spine, the pulse that carries news, goods, and lives from one end of the world to the other. Without it, London would not be London. It would be a cluster of houses, waiting. Yet even in this fullness, there is space for stillness. A young girl sits on a low wall near the bridge, her bare feet dangling above the water. In her lap, she holds a piece of bread, tearing it slowly, feeding the crumbs to a sparrow that hops closer with each offering. Her laughter is soft, musical, blending with the lap of water against the pilings. Nearby, an old man leans on his cane, watching the tide turn, his face calm, his thoughts unreadable. He has seen many summers dry as this one. Many winds blow from the east, and yet he does not fear. He trusts the rhythm of the city, as one trusts the turning of the seasons. Inside the bakery on Pudding Lane, the air is thick with warmth and purpose. The ovens have burned since before dawn, their bellies filled with glowing coals. Loaves stand in neat rows on wooden racks, their crusts deep gold, faintly crackled, still releasing steam in soft sighs. The scent is rich and comforting. Flour, yeast, fire, time. The baker's wife kneads a new batch of dough on a floured table, her hands moving with the certainty of decades. Her daughter stirs a pot of porridge by the hearth, the spoon clicking softly against the pot's rim. The apprentice, barely 16, his arms already strong from labor, lifts a tray of buns into the oven, his brow damp, his movements precise. Their lives are ordinary, yes, but not small. Every loaf shaped, every fire stoked, Every door opened at dawn is an act of faith in the day to come. The bakery is more than a shop. It is a hearth for the neighborhood. Neighbors linger at the counter, not just to buy bread, but to exchange news. A sick relative, a wedding planned, a ship expected in 2 days. The baker listens, nods, offers a second bun for the child, a word of comfort for the worried mother. No one pays for kindness here. It is part of the currency of survival. As the sun climbs higher, the city unfolds like a flower in slow bloom. Market stalls fill the squares. Baskets of apples blushed red and gold, wheels of cheese wrapped in muslin, bundles of herbs tied with string rosemary, thyme, sage, their fragrance rising like a prayer into the air. A blind fiddler plays a tune near the fountain, his music light and lilting, drawing smiles from passers-by who drop coins into his hat without breaking stride. A merchant unrolls a bolt of silk from the Indies, the fabric catching the light like liquid amber. A priest walks by, his robes brushing the cobblestones, his lips moving in silent prayer. Everything feels continuous. The same rituals repeat: the market cries, the tolling bells, the shimmer of sunlight on the river, as though the city has always been and always will be. Children chase hoops down the lanes, their voices echoing off the walls. A cat darts from a doorway, tail high, vanishing into an alley. A dog naps in a patch of sun outside a tavern, twitching in a dream of rabbits. Time does not race here. It settles, like dust in a sunbeam. And yet beneath this calm rhythm, the city carries a quiet tension. The summer has been long and dry. The wooden beams of the houses hum with stored heat, their surfaces warm to the touch even in the shade. The thatch on the roofs crackles faintly underfoot, brittle as parchment. The wind, when it comes, is light and warm, blowing steadily from the east, carrying no rain, only the faint, sharp scent of distant fields parched by sun. The air feels thin, charged, as though holding its breath. No one speaks of danger. Why would they? Fires happen, small ones, contained, extinguished with buckets and prayers. The city has burned before, in part, and risen again. London is old, and old things learn resilience. Its people do not live in fear. They live in trust in their neighbors, in their routines, in the certainty that tomorrow will look much like today. As the day softens toward afternoon, shadows lengthen across the lanes. The light turns golden, rich, forgiving. Women hang washing on lines strung between houses, the damp sheets billowing like sails. Men gather outside taverns, mugs in hand, voices low and easy. Children return home, their faces smudged with dirt, their pockets full of pebbles and feathers and stories. Inside the bakery, the last of the day's bread is cooling on the racks. The apprentice sweeps the floor one final time, the broom bristles whispering over stone. He yawns, stretches, and adds a few more coals to the oven, just enough to keep the embers alive through the night. The baker pats him on the shoulder, says something kind, and locks the front door behind him. The family eats a simple supper by candlelight: bread, cheese, a stew of root vegetables. They speak little, but their silence is warm, full of belonging. Later, as dusk begins to fall, candles flicker to life in windows across the city. Their light spills onto the streets, painting amber halos on the cobblestones. The sounds soften, laughter fades, carts grow fewer, the river's murmur deepens. London exhales. It settles into itself, bone deep, certain. The city sleeps easily tonight. Its people are tired but content, their bodies heavy with the good fatigue of honest work. They dream of ordinary things, of market days, of children's laughter, of bread rising in the oven, of the river glinting in the sun. They do not dream of fire. They do not dream of loss. They dream of continuity, of a world that turns gently, reliably, like a millstone grinding grain. Tomorrow, the air will be different. Tomorrow, the city will wake not to the familiar chime of bells or the cry of gulls, but to the roar of a fire that will change everything. But for now, for this one, fragile, luminous night London rests, whole, alive, innocent, held in the quiet cradle of its own rhythm, beneath the soft glow of 1,000 lanterns, each one a promise kept, a hope unbroken, a flame waiting not to destroy, but simply to burn. Night descends upon London not as an ending, but as a deepening, a slow folding of light into shadow, like a hand drawn gently across the eyes of a child already drifting toward dreams. The last amber edges of sunset fade behind the rooftops, leaving the sky brushed with indigo and the first faint stars, hesitant and tender, as though even the heavens tread softly tonight. Mist curls upward from the Thames, wrapping around the pilings of the bridges and softening the outlines of ships moored along the shore, their masts dark silhouettes against the water's shimmer. Lanterns, already lit in windows and on hooks beside doors, glow more steadily now, their light spilling onto the cobblestones in warm, uneven halos, and somewhere a cat leaps silently from a windowsill to a low wall, its tail held high, its eyes catching the flicker of flame like twin mirrors of amber. The air tonight carries a different weight, not heavy, not oppressive, but thin and dry, as though the summer's long breath has drawn every drop of moisture from the wood, the thatch, the very walls of the city itself. The wind flows steadily from the east, light and warm, slipping between the narrow lanes like a familiar presence moving through a house it has known for generations. It brushes against timber walls already humming with stored heat, stirs the loose thatch on rooftops, and carries with it the faint, sharp scent of distant fields baked to dust by weeks of sun. There is no alarm in this wind, only a quiet persistence, a rhythm as old as the tides, as inevitable as the turning of the seasons. And it moves not to warm, but to wait. In the heart of the city, deep within the winding maze of lanes near the river, the neighborhood around Pudding Lane settles into its nightly rhythm with the ease of long habit. A tavern keeper turns the sign on his door inward, the painted figure of a grinning bear now facing the wood rather than the street, and he blows out the candle by the counter, leaving only the hearth's low pulse of coals glowing beneath a layer of ash. Outside, a milk cart creaks past, its wheels groaning softly on the uneven stones, the horse's breath rising in pale clouds beneath the lantern swinging from its harness, and the city's breath slows, deepens, steadies, as though it too has found its place in the quiet cradle of the night. Inside the bakery on Pudding Lane, the last of the day's warmth still lingers in the air, a deep, comforting presence radiating from the great brick oven that has burned since before dawn. The scent of bread rich, golden, faintly caramelized at the crust mingles with the earthier notes of yeast, flour, and fire, and the baker's wife has laid the table for their simple supper. A loaf cut in half, a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth, a pot of stew simmered slowly over the embers, their voices low and comfortable, worn smooth by years of shared silence, their daughter drowsy from the day's work, resting her head on the table for a moment, her fingers still curled around her spoon, her father stroking her hair gently before rising to bank the fire for the night. His apprentice, the boy with sun-bleached hair and calloused hands, no more than 16, but already shaped by the rhythm of honest labor stays behind to finish the work, sweeping the floor with slow, practiced strokes. The broom bristles whispering across the stone, stacking the last of the coolant trays, wiping down the work table with a damp cloth, and checking the oven one final time, the coals glowing deep red in the belly of the firebox, their light flickering like a heartbeat seen through skin. And he adds a few more pieces of kindling, not to reignite the fire, but to keep the embers alive through the night, so the oven will be ready at dawn. Then, careful not to disturb the sleeping family in the small room above, he spreads his thin pallet near the hearth, pulls a rough wool blanket over his shoulders, and closes his eyes, unaware that a single ember, loosened as he closed the oven door, has drifted downward and landed in a small pile of sawdust and dry wood shavings beside the hearth, where it glows faintly, steadily, like a tiny lantern set in the dark. And for a long moment, nothing happens, until the edge of a splinter begins to darken. A thread of smoke rises thin, silver, silent, and the wood does not crackle yet, but sings a low, soft hiss, like steam escaping from a kettle left too long on the fire, and the flame does not leap, it unfurls, tender and slow, curling around the dry fibers like a hand reaching for warmth. Outside, the wind shifts, just slightly brushing against the shutters of the bakery, finding a gap near the roof line, a space worn loose by years of rain and sun, and slipping inside, carrying with it the last of the day's warmth, and the flame stirs, lifting, stretching, touching the underside of the wooden beam that supports the oven's chimney, the beam old and seasoned by decades of smoke and heat, its surface dry as parchment, its grain tight and dark, welcoming the flame as though it belongs, a line of orange light tracing the wood's path upward, steady and quiet, like ink spreading through paper. And the boy stirs in his sleep, coughs once, softly, and turns onto his side, face away from the hearth. The smoke still faint, no more than a wisp, but carrying a new scent now, sharper, resinous, alive, coiling upward, thin and pale, vanishing into the shadows near the ceiling, while from the alley outside, a stray dog pauses, ears twitching, sniffs the air, lifts its muzzle toward the bakery's shuttered window, then trots on unalarmed, because fires are common in a city of wood in flame. A spark escapes, a curtain smolders, a bucket of water is thrown, life continues. And yet tonight, the conditions are different. The timber drier than it has been in memory. The lanes narrower here, the houses pressed so close that their upper stories nearly touch, their roofs overlapping like the scales of a great, slumbering beast. The wind, though gentle, does not falter, flowing steadily, persistently, carrying warmth, carrying sparks, carrying time itself, forward second by second, breath by breath toward a threshold no one can yet see. Inside the bakery, the flame has reached the rafters, moving not with violence, but with intimacy, as though it knows the house, as though it belongs, licking the underside of the roof beams, tracing the knots and whirls in the wood with flickering fingers. The tarred thatch above beginning to warm, then to smoke, a single tendril of flame rising through a crack in the ceiling, catching on a hanging bunch of dried herbs, rosemary, sage, thyme, their fragrance turning suddenly sharp, acrid as they ignite, the fire not roaring, but breathing. And somewhere down the lane, a night watchman walks his slow, familiar route, his lantern swinging at his side, its light bobbing against the walls, humming tunelessly under his breath, his hand resting on the handle of his axe, not out of fear, but habit. And as he turns the corner onto Pudding Lane, he pauses, smelling now the unmistakable tang of burning pitch, sharper than hearth smoke, heavier than candle wax, lifting his gaze toward the bakery, seeing at first nothing but darkness, then a flicker, not a steady glow, but a pulse of orange light behind the upper shutter, brief and vanishing, like a heartbeat seen through skin, and he hesitates, because it could be nothing, a candle overturned, a bit of tinder catching in the hearth. So he takes a step forward, then another, drawing closer, the scent growing stronger, now hearing too a low rhythmic crackle, like paper folding in a warm room, still not sounding the alarm. Why alarm the whole street for a spark? Better to check first, to knock, to see if the baker is awake, reaching for the door. But before his knuckles touch the wood, a thin line of smoke begins to seep from beneath the threshold, curling across the cobblestones, like a question written in vapor. And above him, the shutter glows faintly from within, not red not yet, but a deep, trembling gold, like sunlight caught in amber, the light growing steadier, brighter, until the wood of the frame itself begins to shimmer. And then, with a soft, sighing sound, the shutter bursts inward not with force, but with release, and a single tongue of flame reaches out into the night air, curling upward like a flower opening at dawn, and the watchman steps back, not shouting, not running, simply standing, watching. As the flame finds the dry timber of the eaves and begins to climb, sparks rising from the roof now, not many, but enough spiraling upward on the warm current of air, carried by the wind toward the house next door. One landing on a pile of hay stacked beneath a window, another catching in the thatch of a neighboring roof, a third drifting down into the alley, glowing faintly as it falls, until it touches the cobblestones and winks out, still unseen, still unremarked. The city sleeps on, families lying in their beds, breathing deeply, their dreams filled with ordinary things market days, children's laughter, the taste of fresh bread, a woman turning in her sleep, her hand finding her husband's, a child murmuring in the dark, chasing a dream just beyond reach, a sailor, home from sea, listening to the creak of the house settling around him, the same sound he knows from the timbers of his ship, and feeling, for the first time in months, safe, not hearing the fire yet, not smelling the smoke, not truly, not the way it will smell in an hour, when it thickens to a living fog, when it clings to skin and hair and the back of the throat, not tasting it metallic, bitter, ancient when the wind carries it across the river and into the gardens of Whitehall, because for now the danger is still small, still local, still private, a secret, shared only between the flame and the wood, the wind and the night. And yet, in that quiet intimacy lies its power, for the fire does not need to announce itself. It does not demand attention. It grows as life grows, as a seed becomes a root, as a breath becomes a song, feeding on what is already there, the dryness of the summer, the closeness of the houses, the trust of a city that believes in its own tomorrow, moving not with malice, but with inevitability, as natural as tide, as quiet as time. By midnight, the sky above Pudding Lane is no longer black, but shimmers with a faint, rosy glow, like the inside of a seashell held to the light, smoke rising in slow, graceful columns, twisting and folding as they ascend, catching the starlight in their coils, the wind carrying embers farther, now not just to the next roof, but down the lane, across the courtyard, toward the warehouses by the river, where barrels of oil and pitch stand in neat rows, waiting, and in the bakery the roof is gone, the walls standing, blackened and trembling, but open to the sky, the apprentice waking at last, coughing, his eyes stinging, stumbling to his feet, disoriented, his blanket slipping from his shoulders, seeing the fire not as a distant threat, but as a presence filling the room, alive and radiant, its light painting the walls in shifting gold and crimson. And for a moment he does not move, simply watches, transfixed, as the flames dance across the ceiling beams, as sparks rise like fireflies into the open night. Then he runs, bursting into the street barefoot, shouting, but his voice is small against the sigh of the wind, against the deep, gathering hum of the fire finding its voice, neighbors stirring, a shutter opening, a face appearing, pale in the growing light, another spark landing on a curtain, another catching in dry ivy clinging to a wall, the fire not rushing, but spreading, patient and sure, like ink in water, like memory in time, and London has not yet awakened. But it is no longer sleeping. It is dreaming now, dreaming of heat that curls like breath against the skin, of light that pulses behind shuttered windows like a hidden heartbeat, of transformation unfolding not with violence, but with the quiet inevitability of dawn rising over ash-covered streets. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the city, the first true roar of the fire rises, not in anger, not in triumph, but in answer to the wind, to the wood, to the long, dry summer that made this moment possible, the whispers having ended, the night having begun to speak. The first cry rises not with panic, but with confusion, a woman leaning from her window on Pudding Lane, her nightgown loose at the collar, her breath catching as she sees the sky above her, painted not in the soft pinks of dawn, but in a deep, trembling red that pulses like a living thing. And for a fleeting moment she believes it is the sunrise, until the heat touches her face like a hand pressed too close to a hearth, and she smells it, the sharp, resinous tang of burning oak, bitter and ancient. A scent that does not belong to bread or candle wax or hearth smoke, but to something deeper, something hungry. And then comes the sound, low at first, like a sigh that rolls through the alleyways, gathering weight as it travels, deepening into a roar that no one can ignore. A sound that lifts neighbors from their beds, draws children to windows, sends dogs barking into the dark. And one door after another opens, not with haste, but with dawning disbelief, as the quiet of night shatters not in an instant, but in layers, like glass cracking under slow pressure. Inside the bakery, the fire has already claimed the room, flames devouring the wooden shelves, curling around the iron oven, climbing the walls with a quiet insistence that feels less like destruction and more like arrival, their light painting the smoke in gold and crimson, turning dust motes into sparks, turning shadows into fleeing ghosts. And the apprentice, coughing, stumbles to his feet, his blanket slipping from his shoulders, his eyes wide not with terror yet, but with incomprehension, as though the world has shifted beneath him while he slept, and he tries to beat the flames back with a damp cloth, swinging it weakly at the base of the fire. But the blaze surges toward him, not angrily, but with the inevitability of tide meeting shore, swallowing the flour sacks, licking the beams overhead, breathing faster and faster, its heat pressing against his skin like a living presence. And he turns, runs, bursts into the street barefoot, shouting, but his voice is small, swallowed by the rising crackle of wood, by the hiss of pitch melting in the rafters, by the deep groan of the roof as it begins to sag. Within minutes, the neighboring houses are alight, their upper stories glowing like torches held against the night, the fire leaping across the narrow gap between buildings, not with effort, but with grace, as though the wind has whispered a secret only the flames can hear, and the dry timber catches instantly, the thatch above bursting into a shower of embers that spiral upward into the dark, carried by the warm currents rising from the heart of the blaze. And the wind, steady and unrelenting, feeds the fire not with violence, but with patience, turning every spark into a messenger, every breath of air into fuel, and the heat grows unbearable, thick and shimmering, making the air ripple like water seen through glass, distorting the shapes of fleeing figures, turning lantern light into halos, turning faces into masks of gold and shadow. London begins to wake, not all at once, but in waves, like a body remembering pain. After sleep, the bells of St. Magnus toll first, their bronze voices heavy and urgent, ringing out across the rooftops in a rhythm older than memory, summoning help, sounding alarm, and one by one, the other churches take up the call, their notes rolling through the smoke like waves over stone. And sleepy figures appear at windows, their faces pale in the orange light, their hair disheveled, their nightclothes clinging to sweat-damp skin. Children cry not from fear yet, but from confusion, their small hands clutching the hems of their mothers' skirts. Dogs bark in sharp, broken bursts, and the narrow lanes fill with smoke so thick it feels alive, curling around ankles, stinging eyes, catching in throats like wool. And the city's heartbeat quickens, not into panic yet, but into motion, a slow, gathering tide of bodies moving toward the river, toward open ground, toward each other. Some rush to form lines with buckets of water, passing them hand to hand in the old way, their arms aching, their feet slipping on wet cobbles, their faces streaked with soot and sweat, knowing even as they lift the buckets that the water will turn to steam before it touches the flames, that the fire is already beyond the reach of such small kindnesses. And yet they try not to save the houses, but to mark the moment with dignity, to say we were here, we tried, we did not look away, while others flee toward the Thames, clutching whatever they can carry, bundles of clothes wrapped in faded quilts, wooden boxes filled with letters and dried herbs, silver spoons passed down through generations, a child's carved horse, a prayer book with pages softened by years of touch, their arms tight around these fragments of life, their steps unsteady, their breath coming in short, sharp gasps as the heat presses against their backs, like a hand urging them forward. The fire moves with purpose, not as a force of chaos, but as a presence with memory and direction. It leaps across lanes and courties not at random, but as though guided by the shape of the city itself, following the path of the wind, the dryness of the wood, the closeness of the houses. And the wind, hot and steady, turns every ember into a seed, scattering them like stars across the rooftops. And curtains catch first, their fabric flaring bright and brief, then thatch, then timber, each ignition a soft hump lost in the growing roar. And within an hour, half the street is engulfed, the flames rising 30, 40 feet into the air. Their light so bright, it casts sharp shadows on faces 100 yards away. And the watchmen try to pull down nearby houses with axes and hooks, their muscles straining, their voices hoarse with shouting. But the wood is already burning before the first blow lands, the beams crumbling to ash at the touch of steel. And the city's defenses, its pumps, its buckets, its desperate courage, seem small, tender, human, against the sheer scale of what has awakened. By the time the sun begins to rise, London's skyline is no longer the soft gray of morning, but a deep, living red, smoke billowing upward and vast, twisting columns that catch the first light and turn gold at their edges, like storm clouds lit from within and from the river. The reflection of the flames turns the water to molten brass, rippling with the movement of boats and the fall of ash. And people gather along the banks in silence, some sitting on crates or barrels, others standing shoulder to shoulder, their arms around one another, staring not with horror, but with a quiet, unbearable recognition, as though they are watching a dream they have had before, one they could not stop. And the smell of pitch and resin fills the air, sharp and metallic, and the wind carries the faint cries of those still trapped behind collapsing walls, not screams, but calls, names spoken into the smoke, voices that rise and vanish like smoke themselves. Through it all, the city's great churches toll their bells, one by one, their notes heavy and trembling, muffled by the thickness of the air, yet persistent, rising above the crackle of fire and the rush of wind. And the sound does not demand attention. It asks for it, gently, humbly, like a hand placed on a shoulder in the dark. And it is not yet a city in ruin, but it is no longer the London of yesterday. Something vast and unstoppable has awakened, a force both beautiful and terrible, born not of malice, but of convergence, of dry wood and careless spark, of narrow lanes and steady wind, of human routine and nature's patience. And it moves not to punish, but to transform. As the morning deepens, the fire spreads toward the riverfront, drawn by the warehouses where barrels of oil, wine, and pitch stand in neat rows, waiting. And each explosion sends sparks cascading into the sky, not in bursts of light, but in slow, falling arcs, like fireflies released from a jar. And the people can only watch as the heart of their city begins to vanish behind a wall of flame. The wind howling through the streets, now not as a breeze, but as a voice, carrying the sound of cracking beams, falling stone, shattering glass, and the soft, terrible sigh of a roof collapsing inward. And by midday, London is no longer waking. It is running, fleeing, crying, its people moving not with direction, but with instinct, drawn toward water, toward open ground, toward the promise of breath. And yet, amid the terror, there is something hauntingly still about the moment. The way the firelight catches on a child's tear, the way an old man stands in the middle of the street, his cane forgotten, his face tilted upward, watching the sparks rise like prayers released into the sky. What began as a spark in a quiet bakery has become a sea of flame that no human hand can control. And the city breathes fire now, its pulse steady, its light unbroken, and the day has only just begun. The city moves now, not as a collection of frightened individuals fleeing in disjointed panic, but as a single breathing organism awakening into fever, its pulse uneven, its breath shallow, its limbs trembling yet purposeful. Every footstep, every lifted hand, every whispered name part of a vast, unspoken choreography of survival that unfolds not with chaos, but with the strange, sorrowful grace of a body learning how to carry its own wounds. And the air itself shimmers with heat, so thick it feels like walking through water, distorting the outlines of houses and spires until the skyline melts into a trembling veil of gold and shadow, turning London not into a place of streets and names, but into a living current of memory and motion, where every gesture carries the weight of what is being left behind, and every breath tastes faintly of ash and the metallic tang of fear held gently in the chest. Flames rise in great, undulating sheets, curling over rooftops like banners unfurled in a wind that knows no hesitation, their light painting the smoke in shifting tones of amber and crimson. And the fire no longer spreads by accident. It moves with quiet intention, guided by the dryness of the timber, the closeness of the lanes, the steady breath of the east wind that pushes it forward like a hand laid gently but firmly on its back, carrying embers high into the air where they spiral upward in slow, glowing arcs, falling upon neighboring houses not as random sparks, but as messengers arriving with quiet certainty, igniting curtains, thatch, timber, one after another, each new flame joining the chorus until the entire district pulses with a single, terrible heartbeat. And the sound that fills the air is not a roar in the brutal sense, but a deep, resonant homicide that rises and falls like the breath of some ancient creature stirring in its sleep. The crackle of wood like paper folding in a warm room, the hiss of pitch melting in the rafters like steam escaping a kettle, the groan of collapsing beams like a voice remembering a name long forgotten. Down by the Thames, the river has become a mirror of chaos and refuge at once, its surface no longer black and still, but alive with the flicker of firelight, rippling under the weight of dozens of boats crowding the banks, their sides pressed close together like animals seeking shelter from the storm, overloaded with families clutching bundles wrapped in faded quilts or oilcloth, wooden boxes tied with twine, silver spoons passed down through generations, a child's carved horse, a prayer book with pages softened by years of touch, a sack of flour salvaged from the pantry, a bird cage with the door left open, its occupant already gone, and the water carries them all away from the shore, gently, steadily, as though the river itself remembers how to hold what the land can no longer protect, its current cool against the heat that presses from behind, a living boundary between destruction and survival. And on the decks of the boats, people sit in silence, some holding hands, others staring into the firelight with eyes that do not blink, their faces painted in shifting hues of orange and gold, their breaths slow and measured, as if conserving air for a journey that has no known end. The wind shifts again, not suddenly, not violently, but with the quiet determination of a river, finding its course, and turns toward the riverfront where warehouses stand in neat rows, their doors wide, their contents laid bare to the flames barrels of oil, wine, pitch, stacked high and dry from the long summer, and when the fire reaches them, each explosion does not shatter the air so much as deepen it, sending waves of heat outward and sparks cascading into the sky in slow falling arcs, like fireflies released from a jar. And the sound is not sharp, but resonant, a deep hump that rolls across the water and settles in the chest like a remembered sorrow. And through the smoke, figures move like shadows in a dream, pulling carts laden with belongings, leading horses whose eyes roll white with fear, shouting names that vanish before they reach the ears of those they call, their silhouettes flickering in the light, fragile and human against the vastness of the blaze. And one man stumbles, drops a wooden chest, and does not stop to retrieve it, his arms now full of his two youngest children, their faces pressed into his shoulder, their small hands gripping his coat as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. Everywhere, the same questions ripple through the crowds, not shouted, but murmured, passed from one person to the next like a shared breath. How far will it go? Will it reach the tower? Will it cross the river? Some whisper that it is divine punishment, their voices low and trembling, fingering rosaries or clutching small crosses of wood, while others curse the dry wind or the city's careless builders, their words sharp with grief. But as the fire spreads, blame dissolves into silence, replaced not by resignation, but by a deeper knowing that there is no time to think, only to move, to carry, to hold, to survive. And London is no longer a city of trade and prayer, of timber and stone, but a single organism of motion, driven not by panic alone, but by the quiet, insistent pull of kinship, of memory, of love that refuses to be consumed. And in the heart of the smoke, a woman kneels beside a fallen cart, helping an elderly man to his feet, her own bundle of clothes lying forgotten at her side, her voice low and steady as she murmurs reassurance that needs no words, only presence, while a group of apprentices, barely more than boys, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, form a line from a shallow well to a burning house, passing buckets of water hand to hand, their arms aching, their feet slipping on wet cobbles, knowing even as they lift the buckets that the water will turn to steam before it touches the flames, that the fire is already beyond the reach of such small kindnesses, and yet they try not to save the walls, but to mark the moment with dignity, to say we were here, we tried, we did not look away, and their rhythm becomes a kind of prayer, steady and unhurried, a counterpoint to the chaos rising around them. In the heart of the city, amid the smoke and ruin, a small group of men stands in the glow of the burning skyline, their faces streaked with soot, their clothes darkened by ash and sweat, and among them the Lord Mayor watches in disbelief, his robe heavy with the weight of a city slipping from his hands, his voice trembling as he orders houses to be torn down to halt the fire's advance. But it is already too late. The wind carries the flames faster than the axes can fall, wooden walls crumbling before the first blow lands, the beams turning to ash at the touch of steel, and the city's defenses, its pumps, its buckets, its desperate courage seem small, tender, human, against the sheer scale of what has awakened, a force both beautiful and terrible, born not of malice, but of convergence, of dry wood and careless spark, of narrow lanes and steady wind, of human routine and nature's patience. And yet even in the face of futility, the men do not stop their axes, ring against the charred beams of warehouses meant to be fire breaks, their muscles straining, their foreheads glistening, their voices hoarse with shouting. And when a beam cracks and falls, sending sparks spiraling into the dark, they do not flinch, but continue, their faces lit in shifting gold and crimson. And one man pauses to wipe his brow with the back of his hand, his gaze lifting for a moment toward the skyline, where the dome of St. Paul's still stands, dark and defiant against the glowing clouds. And in that pause, his eyes meet those of a stranger beside him, a fisherman, his clothes soaked, his hands raw, and they nod, just once, not in triumph, but in recognition, as though to say, we are still here, we are still moving, we are still human. And the work resumes, steady and unhurried, a shared rhythm older than language. By nightfall, the line between land and flame has vanished. The sky glows with a strange, unearthly beauty, orange and gold, shifting like the surface of the sun, and the smoke hides the stars, turning the heavens into a vast, breathing vault of shadow and light, while the wind howls through streets that no longer have names, its voice rising and falling like a hymn sung in a language no one remembers, carrying the scent of burning oak and melted lead, of wool and parchment turned to ash. And on the river, a man rows his family away from the shore, his arms steady, his breath slow, and he looks back only once, just once, and behind him, the city he has always known is gone, replaced by a storm of light that pulses against the dark, the sound of collapsing towers rolling across the water like distant thunder, not angry, not cruel, but immense, inevitable, as if the earth itself were exhaling after holding its breath too long. And the fire continues to burn, alive and unrestrained, consuming everything that stands in its way, yet even in its hunger, there is a strange kind of grace, the grace of transformation, of clearing, of making space for what has not yet been dreamed. And as the night deepens, the movement slows, not from exhaustion alone, but from a gathering stillness, a quiet recognition that the fire has passed a threshold, that it is no longer something to outrun, but something to witness, and the crowds fall silent, not in despair, but in awe, their faces lit by the glow of a world remade, their hands still clasped around the fragments of what they carried, and the river carries them further downstream, away from the inferno that was once their home, its current cool and steady, a gentle counterpoint to the roar that fades behind them. Somewhere in the ruins, a lantern still burns hung on a hook outside a half-collapsed doorway, its flame flickering but unbroken, sheltered by the curve of the wall, and the light spills onto the cobblestones in a small, steady pool, no larger than a handprint, yet bright enough to be seen from the water, and those in the boats see it, and for a moment they do not look away, because that tiny flame is not defiance, not hope in the loud sense, but something quieter, deeper, a refusal to vanish, a promise whispered in light, that even in the heart of destruction, something human endures, not grand, not heroic, but steady, like breath, like memory, like the city itself, learning how to move again, one step, one breath, one ember at a time. And far downriver, where the firelight no longer reaches, a child sleeps in her mother's arms, her head resting on a bundle of clothes, her fingers curled around a small wooden horse, and the boat drifts onward, carried by the current, into the cool, quiet dark, where the only sound is the soft lap of water against the hull, and the distant, fading hum of the city learning how to breathe through fire. By the second night, the city has become a vast, breathing landscape of smoke and ember, where the air trembles with heat and memory, thick enough to wrap around the throat, like wool, yet soft enough to cradle a whisper. And through that glowing haze, figures move not in panic, but in rhythm slow, deliberate, tender as though each step must be measured against the weight of what has been lost, and the quiet hope of what might still be carried forward. Their silhouettes flickering in the firelight, like figures in a dream, their breaths drawn and released in unison with the sigh of the wind through the ruins. And in this suspended world, where flame and silence fold into one another like pages of an old book, the voices that rise are not shouts of terror, but murmurs of care, soft as steam rising from warm stone, steady as a pulse felt beneath the skin. Along the narrow alleys near Cheapside, where the scent of spices once hung in the air like a shared dream, and market cries echoed between timber-bird walls, neighbors move now with careful purpose, helping one another carry bundles wrapped in faded quilts or oilcloth, their hands blackened with soot, their movements unhurried as though time itself has slowed to match the pace of survival. And a woman in a torn woolen shawl takes the arm of an elderly man whose breath comes in short, shallow gasps, guiding him gently through the ash-covered cobbles while murmuring reassurances that need no words, only presence, and nearby, a group of apprentices barely more than boys. Their faces streaked with sweat and grime forms a line from a shallow well to a burning house, passing buckets of water hand to hand with arms aching and feet slipping on wet stone, knowing even as they lift the buckets that the water will turn to steam before it touches the flames, that the fire is already beyond the reach of such small kindnesses. And yet they try, not to save the walls, but to mark the moment with dignity, to say we were here, we tried, we did not look away, their rhythm becoming a kind of prayer, steady and unhurried, a quiet counterpoint to the rising chaos. In a courtyard behind the blackened shell of a small chapel, families gather in the faint circle of lantern light, some sitting on overturned crates or barrels, while others stand shoulder to shoulder with arms around one another, their silence not empty, but full a soft hum of shared exhaustion, of grief held gently, of breath drawn and released in unison. And a mother sits on the ground with her back against a half-collapsed wall, her child curled in her lap, the boy's face smudged with soot yet calm, and she sings to him not a hymn or a remembered lullaby, but something new, born in that moment, her voice trembling yet steady, as it weaves a melody from the hiss of distant fire and the murmur of the river, the song carrying faintly through the smoke until others begin to hum along, their voices blending into a single fragile harmony that holds the night together for a few precious minutes. A lullaby against the roar of destruction, a quiet act of creation in the heart of the burning world. And as the child's breathing deepens and his eyelids grow heavy, his fingers curling around a strand of his mother's hair, the fire for a moment feels distant, held at bay not by walls or water, but by the simple, unbreakable thread of a voice that refuses to break. Further along the riverbank, where the water glints with reflected flame and the air shimmers with heat, soldiers and dockworkers labor together, their axes ringing against the charred beams of warehouses meant to be torn down as fire breaks, their muscles straining and foreheads glistening as they work with voices hoarse from shouting, yet no anger in their movements, only a deep, wordless resolve. And when a beam cracks and falls, sending sparks spiraling into the dark, they do not flinch, but continue, their faces lit in shifting gold and crimson. And one man pauses to wipe his brow with the back of his hand, his gaze lifting toward the skyline where the dome of St. Paul's still stands dark and defiant against the glowing clouds. And in that pause, his eyes meet those of a stranger beside him, a fisherman, his clothes soaked and hands raw, and they nod just once, not in triumph, but in recognition, as though to say, we are still here, we are still moving, we are still human, and the work resumes, steady and unhurried, a shared rhythm older than language, older than fear. On a small boat drifting slowly down the Thames, its sides pressed close to others in the crowded expanse of water, a group of families huddles beneath a tarpaulin, stretched between the mast and the prow, their faces pale in the flicker of a single lantern, whose flame is cupped carefully in glass to shield it from the wind. And a man holds it low, his hand wrapped around the base, his fingers blackened with soot, as his eyes fixed not on the fire behind them, but on the light itself, as though protecting the last ember of the world they knew, while beside him, an old woman clutches a wooden box tied with frayed twine, her knuckles white and lips moving in silent prayer. And when the boat rocks gently in the current, the child beside her stirs, murmuring bread, the bakery, the oven warm in her sleep, and the woman reaches out to brush a strand of ash from the girl's cheek with a touch so light it barely disturbs the air. And in that gesture, the past and the present meet, not in sorrow, but in continuity, a quiet acknowledgement that memory, too, can be carried, held, kept alive through touch, through voice, through breath. In the distance, the bells of St. Paul's toll once more, their bronze voices muffled by the thickness of the smoke, yet persistent enough to rise, above the crackle of fire and the rush of wind, and the sound does not demand attention, but asks for it, gently and humbly, like a hand placed on a shoulder in the dark, and the people pause not all at once, but gradually, as though the sound travels slowly through the haze, settling on skin before reaching the ears, and for a moment, the entire city seems to hold its breath while the flames crackle, the river murmurs, and the wind sighs through the ruins. And in that suspended second, the chime of the bell is not a call to action, but a call to presence, a reminder that time has not stopped, that the world still turns, that even in destruction, there is rhythm, there is order, there is something that endures beyond the reach of flame. Somewhere near the edge of the fire, in the ruins of a courtyard, where ivy still clings to a cracked wall, a priest kneels beside a group of refugees gathered on blankets spread over the ash, his robe torn at the hem and face streaked with soot and sweat, yet his eyes calm and voice low and steady as he speaks not of divine punishment or fate's cruelty, but of endurance, of the quiet strength it takes to stand when everything around you has fallen. And though his words are carried away by the wind, the feeling remains, settling over the group like a second blanket, warm and unseen. And a young man with his arm bandaged in torn linen reaches out to take the hand of the woman beside him, their fingers interlacing without a word. And in that silence, something passes between them, not hope in the loud sense, but something deeper. A shared resolve, a refusal to vanish, a promise whispered without sound that they will walk through this night together, one breath, one step, one ember at a time. As the night deepens, the fire rages on, its light painting the smoke in shifting tones of gold and crimson, its roar a constant hum beneath the surface of the world. And yet, amid the heat and the ruin, the voices of compassion rise with it, not loud or triumphant, but persistent, like roots pushing through stone, like light finding its way through cracks in a wall, and each one carries a different song, a mother's lullaby, a worker's shout, a prayer whispered to the wind, the soft clink of a mug passed from hand to hand, the rustle of a blanket shared between strangers, the quiet creak of a cart pulled slowly down a ruined lane, and together these voices form a chorus that does not oppose the fire, but exists alongside it, a testament to the fact that even in the heart of destruction, humanity glows like a coal that will not die, waiting not for the dawn to return, but for the moment it is ready to rise again. And far downriver, where the firelight no longer reaches and the air grows cool and clean, a child sleeps in her mother's arms, her head resting on a bundle of clothes and fingers curled around a small wooden horse, and the boat drifts onward, carried by the current into the quiet dark, where the only sound is the soft lap of water against the hull and the distant, fading hum of a city learning how to breathe through fire. And in that silence, beneath the weight of ash and memory, something unseen begins to stir, not yet a plan, not yet a dream, but the first quiet pulse of a truth that will soon take shape. We are still here, and we will rebuild. The third night falls not with darkness, but with deepening a slow folding of flame into ember, of roar into hum, of urgency into exhaustion, as though the fire itself has begun to tire of its own hunger, and the city, still breathing though wounded, settles into a strange and fragile equilibrium, where the line between waking and dreaming blurs like smoke on water, and the air, though still thick with the scent of charred oak and melted lead, carries now a new note, not just loss, but the quiet, almost imperceptible pulse of endurance, like a heartbeat felt through layers of cloth, steady and unresolved. Smoke hangs heavy over the Thames, a vast shifting veil that softens the edges of boats and bridges until they seem drawn in charcoal rather than built in wood and stone. And beneath it, the river moves with patient indifference, its current cool and steady, carrying ash downstream as though it were silt from a distant mountain. And on the water, families rest in silence, some lying on blankets spread over the hulls of barges, others sitting with backs against the mast, their faces pale in the faint glow of lanterns whose flames flicker but do not die. And a child sleeps curled against her mother's side, her breath slow and even, her fingers still wrapped around the wooden horse she carried from the bakery district, while the woman watches the smoke drift across the stars, her hand resting lightly on her daughter's back, her thoughts not of what was lost, but of the weight and warmth of what remains. In the ruins near Cornhill, where the fire burned hottest and fastest, a group of men works through the night, not to fight the flames, for the front has passed, but to shore up the edges, to prevent the collapse of half-standing walls whose timbers groan under their own weight like old bones in winter. And they move with slow, deliberate care, their axes no longer swung in haste, but used to brace and support, their ropes knotted with precision, their voices low and steady as they call out measurements and warnings. And one man pauses to press his palm against a wall still warm to the touch, feeling the faint tremor of heat moving deep within the bricks, a reminder that the fire may have passed, but its memory lingers in the bones of the city. And he does not pull his hand away, but leaves it there for a moment, as though listening, as though learning the language of survival from the very stones. Along the edge of the firebreak near the tower, where houses were pulled down in desperate haste and now lie in heaps of splintered timber and shattered glass, a woman kneels beside a pile of belongings salvaged from her home, a brass candlestick dented but whole, a bundle of letters tied with blue ribbon, a small clay pots still holding dried rosemary, and she sorts them, slowly, her fingers brushing each object with the same tenderness she once used to smooth her children. As hair, and when a gust of wind sends ash swirling around her, she does not flinch, but draws her shawl tighter and continues, her movements unhurried, as though time itself has learned to wait. And nearby, a boy of no more than 10 sits on an overturned bucket, sharpening a stick with a pocket knife, his brow furrowed in concentration. His task not useful, not urgent, but necessary, a way to hold his hands steady, to give his mind a place to rest. And when he finishes, he offers the carved point to the woman without a word, and she takes it, nods, and tucks it into her bundle, a small, sharp hope carried forward. The wind has shifted at last, not dramatically, not with a sudden gust, but with the quiet certainty of a tide turning. And now it flows from the west, cool and faintly damp, carrying with it the distant scent of rain over fields, a promise not yet fulfilled, but no longer impossible. And as it moves through the ruins, it stirs the embers in the gutters and cellars, lifting sparks in slow spiraling, arcs that rise and vanish like fireflies released at dusk. And the fire responds not with rage, but with a slow, reluctant dimming, its edges softening, its roar deepening into a sigh. And for the first time in days, the night feels like night again, not a stage for destruction, but a vessel for rest, for breath, for the quiet work of staying alive. In a shelter formed by the collapsed roof of a chandler's shop, 3 families share space beneath a tarpaulin stretched between charred beams, their belongings arranged in careful order along the walls as though reasserting the dignity of routine. And a man passes around a single mug of weak tea, its warmth precious, its taste faintly of smoke, and each person holds it for a long moment before drinking, their hands wrapped around the ceramic as though drawing strength from its solidity. And when the last sip is taken, the mug is rinsed in a bowl of river water and passed back, not out of duty, but out of rhythm, a small act of trust repeated without words. While outside, a dog lies curled at the foot of the steps, its ears twitching at the distant crackle of a stubborn fire, its body relaxed, its breath deep, as though it too has learned that the world, though changed, is still safe enough to sleep in. Somewhere near St. Paul's, where the great dome still stands black against the sky, though the surrounding buildings are gone, a group of clerks and scholars gathers in the shadow of the cathedral steps, their arms full of salvaged books, some singed at the edges, others damp with river water, all bound in leather worn soft by years of use. And they lay them out on clean cloths to dry, turning each page with care, their fingers brushing the ink as though afraid it might vanish. And one man pauses over a volume of Virgil, its margins filled with notes in a hand now lost to the fire, and he traces a single line with his thumb tempus edax rerum time, devourer of things, and though he does not speak the words aloud, the others feel their weight, and for a moment no one moves, as though the air itself holds its breath in recognition of what endures not in stone or flame, but in thought, in memory, in the quiet act of turning a page. The river carries whispers, now not of panic, but of planning. A carpenter sketches a roof joint in the dirt with a stick, describing how oak and iron might stand closer together next time. A baker recounts the way the wind moved through Pudding Lane, his voice low and precise, as though mapping the path of the fire, not to blame, but to understand. A woman hums a tune while mending a tear in her daughter's sleeve, and the melody is the same one she sang 2 nights ago in the chapel courtyard, and those who hear it nod, not in recognition of the song, but in acknowledgement of its return, a sign that the world is beginning, slowly, to knit itself back together, one thread, one note, one breath at a time. As the hours pass, the fire's light fades from the sky, replaced by the true dark of deep night, and the stars emerge, not all at once, but gradually, like friends returning after a long absence, their light trembling through the thinning smoke, cool and ancient and unbroken. And for the first time in days, the city feels small again, not in defeat, but in perspective, held gently in the palm of the world, And people look up, not to pray or plead, but simply to remember that they are still beneath the same heavens, still part of the same turning earth. And in that quiet gaze upward, something shifts, not hope, not yet, but the first quiet stirring of continuity, the knowledge that dawn will come, not as a miracle, but as a fact, as certain as breath, as steady as the river's flow. And far from the ruins, in a field beyond the city walls where the air is clean and the grass still damp with dew, a horse grazes peacefully, its reins tied to a fence post, its coat warm in the moonlight, and beside it, a man sits on a fallen log, his head in his hands, his shoulders, shaking not with sobs, but with the slow, deep release of held breath. And when he lifts his face, his eyes are dry, his expression not empty, but clear, and he rises, walks to the horse, and strokes its neck with a hand that no longer trembles, and without a word he mounts, and turns back toward the city, not to fight, not to mourn, but to witness, to be present, to walk once more into the smoke, because the longest night is not the one filled with fire, but the one that ends quietly, inevitably in return. Dawn arrives not with fanfare, not with a trumpet of light piercing the dark, but with the quiet insistence of something ancient and tender, the slow brightening of the eastern sky from deep indigo to a pale, milky gold, like honey stirred into water, and the smoke, still rising from the heart of the city, softens in the new light, its edges blurring, its color shifting from angry crimson to a gentle rose, as though the fire itself has learned to sigh, and the world, exhausted but unbroken, draws its first full breath in days, its chest rising slowly, deliberately, beneath the weight of ash and memory. The river catches the first rays of sun and holds them, turning the water into a slow-moving mirror of light, its surface rippling with the passage of boats still anchored along the banks, their crews resting now in the calm that follows storm. And on one barge near London Bridge a woman rises from her blanket, her joints stiff from the night's cold, and walks to the prow, where she cups her hands and lets river water spill over her face, the shock of it sharp and clean, washing away soot and sweat and something deeper grief held too tightly. And as she lifts her head, droplets clinging to her lashes, she sees the city for the first time in daylight, not as a nightmare, but as a landscape reshaped, where towers and spires still stand amid the ruins, where the dome of St. Paul's rises black but unshaken against the brightening sky. And she does not cry, but breathes deeply, steadily, as though learning how to live in this new world, one breath at a time. In the streets where the fire burned hottest, the air still hums with residual heat, rising from cellars and gutters like breath from a sleeping body. And the ground is warm beneath bare feet, the cobblestones cracked in places, their surfaces dusted with fine gray ash that clings to skin like powdered stone. And figures move slowly through the lanes, not in panic now, but in quiet purpose, their arms full of salvaged things, a dented kettle, a bundle of dry clothes, a wooden stool with one leg splintered. And they pause often, not to rest, but to look, to take in the sheer scale of what has changed. And when two strangers meet in the middle of a ruined lane, they do not speak at first, but stand for a moment, shoulders nearly touching, their gazes following the same line of broken walls and blackened beams. And only then does one nod, and the other returns it, and they continue on their way, not as survivors of disaster, but as witnesses to transformation. Near the edge of the fire break, where houses were pulled down in desperate haste, a carpenter kneels beside a pile of timber, not charred but whole, spared by the wind's sudden turn, and he runs his hand along the grain of an oak beam, feeling its solidity, its promise, and beside him his apprentice sorts nails salvaged from the rubble, laying them in rows on a cloth spread over the ground, each one wiped clean, each one counted. And though no house stands here, yet the act of sorting feels like a beginning, like the first note of a song not yet sung. And further down the lane, a woman sweeps ash from the threshold of a half-standing shop, her broom, moving in slow, steady strokes, her motions, not frantic but reverent, as though she is not clearing debris, but preparing a space for return. The scent in the air has changed, not vanished, but layered anew beneath the lingering tang of smoke and pitch. Now rises the damp, mineral breath of the river, the green sharpness of crushed grass trampled underfoot, the faint sweetness of bread baking somewhere in a surviving oven near the outskirts. And from a courtyard where ivy still clings to a cracked wall, the sound of a kettle coming to boil rises like a prayer, its thin whistle weaving through the silence, and a man carries a tray of mugs to a group seated on crates and barrels, the steam rising in pale ribbons that catch the morning light. And as each person takes a cup, they hold it for a long moment, their hands wrapped around the warmth, their faces turned toward the sun, not in worship, but in acknowledgement, as though greeting an old friend returned after a long absence. Children appear, now not crying, not hiding, but exploring, their steps light, their voices soft and curious, as they move through the ruins like archaeologists of their own lives, lifting broken tiles, tracing the outlines of vanished doorways with their fingers, picking up fragments of pottery and holding them up to the light as though trying to read the stories baked into the clay. And one girl kneels beside a pile of ash where a garden once stood, and she sifts through it with careful hands until she finds a single acorn, blackened but whole, and she places it in the pocket of her dress, not as a trophy, but as a secret, a quiet pact with the future, while nearby, a boy tests the weight of a half-melted spoon, its bowl warped into a soft curve, and he runs his thumb along its edge, feeling the smoothness where fire and metal met and yielded to one another. At the edge of the Thames, fishermen haul their nets not for profit, but for presence, their movements slow and rhythmic, their faces calm in the morning light, and when a net rises empty, they do not curse, but smile faintly and cast again, their patience not born of hope, but of habit, of the deep knowledge that the river gives in its own time. And beside them, a baker's apprentice's face, still smudged with soot, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, washes flour sacks in the shallows, the water turning gray as it rinses away the last traces of ash. And when he lifts one, dripping, into the sun, he holds it up for a moment, watching the light pass through the thin, wet fabric, and he nods, as though satisfied, as though this simple act of cleaning is a kind of prayer spoken in motion. The bells of St. Paul do not toll this morning, not yet, but a single ringer climbs the tower in silence and places his hand on the great rope, testing its weight, its tension, and when he pulls, gently, the bell answers with a low, resonant note that rolls across the rooftops and settles over the city like a blanket, not a call to worship, but a call to presence, a reminder that time has not stopped, that the world still turns. And in the streets below, people pause not all at once, but gradually, as though the sound travels slowly through the air, settling on skin before reaching the ears, and they lift their faces, not in fear, not in joy, but in quiet recognition, as though hearing their own names spoken after a long silence. Somewhere in the ruins of Pudding Lane where the bakery once stood, a man kneels in the ash and presses his palm flat against the cobblestones, feeling the last warmth of the fire deep beneath the surface. And beside him his son barefoot, his hair tousled places, his smaller hand over his father's, their fingers, not quite touching, but close, and they stay like that for a long time, neither speaking, neither moving, while the sun climbs higher, spilling light across the ruins, turning ash to gold, and in that silence, something passes between them, not a promise of return, but a deeper truth, that what was lost is remembered, that what remains is held, and that the act of kneeling together, in the place where it began, is itself a kind of rebuilding. And as the morning deepens, the city does not rise all at once, but in layers, first the river, then the lanes, then the courtyards, then the doorways, and with each layer, a new rhythm emerges, the creak of a cartwheel, the clink of a hammer on stone, the soft murmur of voices planning, not in grand terms, but in small ones, a roof, a wall, a meal shared, and the light, now full and golden, pours over the ruins not to erase them, but to illuminate them, to show the shape of what was the space of what will be. And in that light, London does not feel broken, but open like a book, whose pages have been turned like a seed, split by spring like a breath drawn deeply fully, and released ready for the next. Ash does not forget. It settles, it layers, it clings to skin and stone, and the folds of cloth with the quiet persistence of memory itself. And in the stillness of the morning after fire, it becomes more than residue. It becomes a language written in gray and silver, a silent archive held in the hollows of gutters and the cracks between cobbles, where each grain carries the echo of what once burned, not just wood and thatch, but laughter in a kitchen, the weight of a child's hand in a parent's, the scent of rosemary hung to dry above a hearth, and those who walk through the ruins do not brush it away, but let it dust their shoes, their sleeves, their hair, as though wearing a second skin woven from the past, soft and sorrowful, and strangely sacred. In the courtyard of a half-collapsed house near Cheapside, a woman kneels beside a pile of ash and sifts through it with careful hands, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately, not in search of treasure, but of traces of a brooch lost in the rush to flee, of a letter sealed with wax of the smooth curve of a child's wooden horse. And when her fingertips meet something cool and round beneath the dust, she does not pull it free at once, but cups her hand around it, feeling its shape through the ash, and only then lifts it, a single glass bead, its surface clouded with soot, yet still catching the light, and she holds it in her palm, turning it slowly, as though reading a story written in its curve. And though no one speaks, the others nearby pause in their work, their gazes softening, because they know, without words, that this small thing is not lost, but found, a fragment of continuity held gently in the hollow of a hand. Along the riverbank, where boats still rest in the shallows, families sort through salvaged belongings laid out on blankets spread over the damp grass, their movements unhurried, their voices low and steady. And a man unfolds a quilt stitched by his mother decades ago, its edges singed, but its center intact, the fabric still holding the faint scent of lavender and sunlight. And he runs his thumb over the stitches, not to count them, but to feel their strength, their stubbornness, their refusal to unravel, even after fire. And beside him, his daughter holds up a book whose cover is charred, but whose pages remain dry, and she opens it to a page where the ink has not bled, where the words still stand, clear and whole, and she reads aloud, not a passage of grand meaning, but a simple line about a bird returning to its nest at dusk, and the others listen, not because the words are wise, but because they are there, unbroken, surviving, and in that moment, the quilt and the book and the voice become a single act of defiance, quiet and unshakable. In the ruins of the bakery on Pudding Lane, where the oven's brick shell still stands like a monument to warmth and labor, the apprentice returns at dawn, his arms empty, his steps slow, and he walks the perimeter of what was once his home, his eyes not on the blackened beams or the collapsed roof, but on the ground where the ash is thinner in places, revealing the outlines of things no longer there, the curve of the work table, the square of the hearthstone, the path worn smooth by years of footsteps. And he kneels, not in grief, but in recognition, and presses his palm flat against the warm stone, feeling the residual heat hum beneath his skin like a faint heartbeat. And when he rises, he does not look back, but walks to the river and fills a bucket, and returns and pours the water slowly onto the ashes near the hearth, not to extinguish, but to bless, to mark the place where fire began and life continued. Smoke still rises in thin threads from cellars and hidden corners, curling upward into the morning light like questions without answers. And the wind, now cool and steady from the west, carries the scent of damp earth and distant rain, a promise not yet fulfilled, but no longer distant. And as it moves through the ruins, it stirs the ash into soft spirals that rise and settle again. And children watch them, their eyes wide, their hands still, as though witnessing something holy, and one boy reaches out and lets a wisp drift across his fingers. And though it leaves no mark, he smiles, not in joy, but in wonder, as though he has touched time itself, as though he understands, without words, that endings and beginnings are not opposites, but neighbors, sharing a wall, a breath, a single grain of ash. At the edge of a ruined garden, where roses once climbed, a trellis now blackened and broken, an old man sits on a stone step, his cane beside him, his hands resting on his knees, and he does not speak, but watches as a sparrow hops through the ash, pecking at something unseen. And when the bird lifts its head, a seed held in its beak, the man does not move, but his eyes soften, and he stays there long after the bird has flown, his gaze fixed on the spot where it stood, as though the small act of finding life in the ruins has settled something deep within him. And nearby, a woman places a single sprig of rosemary green, unburned, carried in her pocket for days, on the step beside him. And she does not say a word, nor does he, but she rests her hand on his shoulder for a moment, and he covers it with his own. And in that silence, the garden is not gone, but waiting, its memory held in scent, in touch, in the quiet certainty that roots remain, even when stems are lost. Inside the shell of a chandler's shop, where shelves once held candles of every size and hue, a boy sorts through melted wax, pooled on the floor. Its colors swirled, together ivory and gold and deep red, into new forms no artisan could have planned, and he picks up one piece, its surface smooth and cool, its shape like a teardrop frozen in time, and he turns it in the light, watching how it catches the sun and throws tiny rainbows onto the wall. And though it will never burn, it still holds light, still holds beauty, still holds the echo of its purpose. And he places it carefully in a wooden box beside other fragments, a shard of blue glass, a button of bone, a length of unburned twine, and closes the lid, not to hide them, but to keep them safe, as though gathering the pieces of a dream not yet finished. The river carries whispers, now not of panic, but of names spoken softly, of stories told and retold in low voices beneath the stars. She was standing by the window, holding the teapot. He went back for the birdcage, though we told him not to. The cat ran ahead, and we followed. And these stories are not warnings, not lessons, but offerings, fragments of lives held gently in the hands of those who remember. And when one voice falters, another takes up the thread, not to complete the story, but to hold it, to keep it warm, like embers banked for the night. And in this way, memory becomes a kind of architecture, built not in stone, but in breath, in voice, in the quiet act of saying I was there. And this is what I saw. As the sun climbs higher, light spills across the ruins not to erase them, but to reveal them, to show the grain in the blackened beams, the pattern in the cracked tiles, the delicate curve of a melted spoon resting in the ash like a sleeping bird. And people move through this transformed landscape not as strangers, but as pilgrims, pausing at thresholds no longer marked by doors, tracing the outlines of vanished rooms with their eyes, kneeling to press their palms against walls still warm with memory. And in these gestures there is no despair, but a deep, steady love, a love that does not demand return, but simply bears witness, that does not rebuild in haste, but honors the shape of what was, before daring to imagine what might be. And far from the center of ruin, in a field beyond the city walls where the grass is green and unbroken, a woman sits beneath an oak tree, her back against the trunk, her lap filled with ash she has carried from her home in a cloth bundle, and she opens it slowly, letting the fine gray powder spill onto the earth, and the wind lifts it in soft spirals, carrying it over the grass, into the roots of the tree, into the soil that feeds the world. And she does not weep, but closes her eyes and breathes. And when she rises, she places her hand on the bark, feeling its roughness, its strength, its quiet, unbroken life, and she walks back toward the city, not to mourn, not to hurry, but to return to the ruins, to the river, to the work of remembering, because ash does not end. It settles, it nourishes, it waits, and in its stillness, it holds the shape of everything that was, and the promise of everything that will rise again. Return does not arrive with fanfare or proclamation, but with the quiet certainty of a hand reaching for a familiar tool, the weight of a trowel in a mason's maman, the grain of fresh-cut oak beneath a carpenter's thumb, the smooth curve of a bucket handle worn by years of used gestures repeated not out of habit alone, but as acts of faith, small and steady, like breath drawn after a long silence. And in these motions, the city begins to rebuild not from the top down, but from the ground up, stone by stone, beam by beam, thread by thread, each action a quiet promise spoken in wood and mortar, in steam rising from a kettle, in the sound of a saw pulled steadily through green timber. Along the riverbank, where boats once crowded in desperation, space has opened like a breath released, and in that space, men and women gather with carts laden not with salvaged relics, but with new materials, planks of pale oak, still smelling of forest and rain, ricks stacked in neat rows, bundles of reed for thatching tied with twine. And they do not rush, but measure twice, speak softly, test the weight of each beam before lifting, as though the act of building demands not speed, but reverence. And a woman kneels to lay the first stone of a new foundation, her fingers brushing the cool surface before pressing it into the wet mortar, not as a symbol, but as a beginning, a point of contact between memory and future. And when she rises, her hands dusted with lime, she does not step back to admire her work, but passes the trowel to the man beside her, and he takes it without a word and continues, the rhythm unbroken. In the shell of a half-standing house near the tower, a joiner fits a new doorframe into the surviving stone archway, his movements precise, his breath steady, and though the wood is fresh and pale, where the old was dark and smoke-stained, he carves the same small cross into the lintel not out of superstition, but continuity, a mark left by hands before him, now repeated by his own, and inside, a woman sweeps the floor not of ash, but of sawdust, her broom moving in slow, deliberate strokes, her feet bare, her dress clean for the first time in days, and when she pauses to rest, she leans against the new frame, feeling its solidity, its promise, and smiles not widely, not brightly, but deeply, as though recognizing an old friend returned in a new form. Children play now not among ruins, but beside them, their games shifting to reflect the world remade. A girl arranges pebbles in the shape of a house, its roof a curved tile, its doorway marked by two upright twigs, while a boy drags a stick through the dust, drawing roads that connect his imagined buildings to hers. And when a real cart rumbles past, carrying beams for a new warehouse, they pause to watch, their eyes tracing the grain of the wood, the sweat on the hauler's brows, the careful way the driver guides the horse around a patch of soft ground, and they do not mimic the work, but absorb it, as though learning the language of return, not through instruction, but through witness, their small hands already knowing, without being told, that rebuilding is not an event, but a rhythm, steady and shared. At the edge of a cleared lot where the fire burned hottest, a baker tests the draft of a new oven built from brick and clay, its mouth still open, its belly empty, and he crouches beside it, holding a strip of cloth in his hand, watching how it lifts and falls in the faint current of air, and when the breeze catches it steadily pulling it inward, he nods, not in triumph, but in satisfaction, and rises to mix the first batch of dough in a wooden bowl salvaged from the ruins, its sides scarred but sound, and as he kneads his arms moving in the old familiar arc, the rhythm of his breath matches the rise and fall of the cloth, and the scent of flour and yeast begins to rise, faint but unmistakable, a thread of continuity woven through smoke and stone. The river, once a refuge, now becomes a vein of renewal, its currents carrying not just people, but possibility. Boats arrive from upstream, laden with timber floated down from the forests of Surrey, their decks stacked with logs still damp with river water, their crews singing low, as they tie up at the rebuilt wharves. And dock workers unload not with haste, but with care, rolling each log onto carts lined with straw to prevent splitting. And a young apprentice, his hands still soft from lack of callus, watches them, his eyes tracing the path from forest to river to city. And when one of the older men hands him a rope and shows him how to coil, and not tight, not loose, but just so, he takes it, and his fingers learn the weight, the texture, the trust required to hold something that will hold everything else. In a courtyard where ivy has already begun to climb the new brick wall, a woman hangs washing on a line strung. Between two posts, the sheets pale and clean, fluttering in the breeze like sails set for calm waters. And as she pins the last corner, she pauses to watch the light catch the fabric, turning it translucent, golden, alive, and she thinks not of what was lost, but of this simple act of clean cloth, of sun and wind, of space enough to stretch a line, and she reaches into her pocket and takes out the acorn the girl found days ago in the ash, and she presses it into the soft earth at the base of the wall, not with ceremony, but with quiet intention, as though planting not a tree, but a question. What will grow here, in the space we make with our hands? Voices rise now not in shouts of alarm, but in murmurs of planning over shared mugs of tea, in the shade of half-built roofs, on benches set beside the river, their words not grand, but grounded. The beam should be set 6 inches deeper. The chimney needs a wider flue. Let the children sleep in the loft until the walls are plastered. And these conversations are not debates, but collaborations, each voice adding a thread to a larger weave. And when disagreement arises, it is met not with anger, but with silence, with a shared glance toward the ruins nearby, a quiet reminder that what matters is not who is right, but what stands. And so they adjust, they compromise, they try again, their hands never still, their eyes always on the shape taking form before them. As the sun sets on the first week of return, lanterns are lit not hung outside doors in fear of the dark, but placed on windowsills and workbenches to extend the day's light, their flames steady, their glow pooling on new wood and fresh mortar. And in one such window, a man sits at a table he built that morning, his hands resting on its smooth surface, and he traces the grain with his fingertips, feeling the life still in the wood, the memory of the tree it came from. And across from him, his daughter places a bowl of stew in the center of the table, the steam rising in soft curls, and they do not say grace, but wait just a moment until the other is ready. And when they begin to eat, the sound is not of hunger, but of belonging, of a table holding weight, of a room holding breath, of a home learning, once more, how to be filled. And far down river, where the city lights begin to shimmer on the water like stars returned to earth, a boat drifts slowly with the current, its sails furled, its deck empty, but for a single lantern swaying gently on its hook, and the light spills onto the waves in a trembling path, golden and unbroken, leading back not to what was, but to what is being made, slowly, tenderly, by hands that remember how to hold, how to build, how to return, because rebuilding is not about erasing the fire, but about living beside its memory, about shaping a world that holds both ash and acorn, both loss and light, both the weight of what was and the quiet, steady promise of what will rise, one breath, one beam, one heartbeat at a time. A city is not reforged in a single day, nor in the striking of a cornerstone, but in the accumulation of small, repeated acts, the press of a trowel into wet mortar, the creak of a freshly hung door, the sound of a kettle coming to boil in a kitchen whose walls still carry the faint scent of smoke beneath the lime wash, and London rises, now not as a replica of what was lost, but as a new iteration shaped by memory and tempered by fire, its streets wider, its buildings of brick and stone where timber once stood, its people moving through the lanes with a gait that is neither hurried nor hesitant, but steady, as though they have learned to walk with the weight of loss and the lightness of return held in balance, like two hands clasped around a single cup of tea. In the rebuilt bakery on Pudding Lane, smaller now, its windows larger, its oven set deeper into a brick hearth that breathes more steadily, the apprentice, no longer a boy, but a young man with calluses earned in ash and mortar, draws the first loaf of the morning from the flames, its crust crackling softly as it meets the cooler air, and he places it on the cooling rack beside others, their surfaces golden and faintly blistered, their scent rich with yeast and thyme. And when the baker's daughter opens the shop shutters, the light spills across the loaves like a blessing, and the first customer a woman who once lived 3 doors down, now housed in a new cottage by the river, smiles not at the bread, but at the rhythm of the gesture, the familiarity of the steam rising, the quiet certainty that some things, after all, endure. Along the Thames, where wharves have been rebuilt with wider berths and stronger pilings, boats arrive not just with timber and stone, but with seed sacks of wheat, bundles of flax, jars of apple pips wrapped in cloth, and at the edge of a newly cleared plot near the tower men and women dig rows in the soft earth, their spades turning the soil where ash once lay thick, and a child walks behind them, dropping acorns into the furrows, her fingers brushing the cool dampness of the ground, and when she pauses to wipe her brow, her palm comes away streaked with dirt and something darker, a trace of old ash, still present, still part of the soil, not erased, but integrated, as though the earth itself remembers that grief and growth share the same root. The river, ever patient, carries the city's new rhythm in its current, the steady lap of water against rebuilt piers, the creak of ropes tightening on fresh-moored hulls, the low murmur of voices planning not in grand terms, but in practical ones. The roof should pitch higher to shed rain. Let the hearth face east for the morning sun. Build the stairs wide enough for 2 to pass, and these conversations are not blueprints, but breath, shared between neighbors over shared tools, their hands never still, their eyes always measuring light, wind, weight, as though learning anew how to belong to a place that has learned, in turn, how to hold them. In a courtyard where a new well has been dug, its stone rim smooth and cool to the touch, women gather at dusk to draw water, their buckets rising full and heavy, their arms strong from months of lifting, and as they pour the water into troughs for washing, for cooking, for the small garden of herbs already pushing green shoots through the soil, they do not speak of the fire, but of the weight of the bucket, the chill of the water, the way the light catches the droplets as they fall. And in these details, in this attention, they honor what was lost not with monuments, but with presence, with the quiet insistence of daily life resumed, not as denial, but as devotion. Children no longer trace the outlines of vanished rooms in the dust, but run through lanes that have names again, their laughter rising like birdsong above the sound of hammers and saws. And one boy carries a wooden horse, not the one found in the ash, but a new one, carved by the carpenter who once pulled down burning beams, its body smooth, its legs sturdy, a small notch in its ear where the maker tested his knife, and when the boy sets it down beside the threshold of his family's new home, he does not leave it there, but picks it up again, holds it for a moment, and tucks it into his pocket, not as a toy, but as a companion, a witness to the fact that joy, too, can be rebuilt, not identical, but whole. At the edge of St. Paul's, where scaffolding still climbs the great dome like ivy, made of rope and timber, a stonemason fits a new cornice into place, his hands guiding the carved stone with slow precision, and though the design is modern cleaner lines, deeper grooves to shed rain he carves, almost invisibly, into the shadow of a curve, the same small cross his grandfather once left in the old cathedral's foundation, not as superstition, but as continuity, a quiet thread of memory woven into the new. And when he steps back to check the alignment, he does not look at the skyline, but at the river where the light is turning gold, and he nods not in satisfaction, but in recognition, as though the city, like the stone in his hands, is finding its true level, not by force, but by patience. Inside a newly plastered room, whose walls still hold the warmth of the drying lime, a woman hangs, A salvaged mirror above the hearth, its glass cracked in one corner, but still reflecting the firelight in soft, rippling gold, and she adjusts it until the flame is centered, not to hide the crack, but to include it, to let the light pass through both the whole and the broken. And when her daughter enters, carrying a bundle of dried rosemary tied with blue ribbon, she does not hang it in the old place, but beside the mirror, where the steam from the kettle will rise and stir its scent into the air. And they stand together for a moment, not speaking, their shoulders nearly touching, watching the light move across the wall, as though witnessing something sacred, not perfection, but wholeness flawed, tender, alive. As evening settles, lanterns are lit not in fear of the dark, but in celebration of the day's work, a soft glow spilling from windows onto cobblestones, swept clean from carts parked beside half-built walls, from the deck of a barge where a family eats supper beneath the stars. And the light does not banish the shadows, but softens them, turns them into places of rest, of breath, of quiet conversation. And in one such window, the old man who once sat in the ruined garden now sits in a new chair, its wood pale and smooth, his hands resting on his knees, his eyes closed not in sleep, but in listening to the creak of the floorboards, the murmur of voices next door, the distant chime of the bell, no longer muffled, but clear, ringing out over rooftops that stand straight and strong. And he smiles, not because the past is forgotten, but because the present is here, warm and real and held in common. And far down river, where the city lights shimmer on the water like a path of stars returned to earth, a boat drifts slowly with the current, its sails furled, its deck empty, but for a single lantern swaying gently on its hook, and the light spills onto the waves in a trembling path, golden and unbroken, leading back not to what was, but to what is. A city that breathes again, not as it once did, but as it must, with wider streets and stronger walls and hearts that carry both ash and acorn, both memory and motion, both the weight of what burned, and the quiet, steady promise of what rises, not in defiance of the fire, but because of it, shaped by it, made tender and strong and deeply, irrevocably human, one loaf, one beam, one breath at a time. The fire is gone, now not vanished, but absorbed, folded into the grain of the city like a thread of gold woven into dark cloth, its heat lingering only in the deeper layers of brick and stone, its memory held not in monuments, but in the way. A door is hung a little wider, and the scent of rosemary hung to dry above anew. Hearth in the quiet pause people take when the wind shifts from the east, as though listening for a voice they have learned to recognize but no longer fear. And London breathes again, not as it did before, but as it must. Deeper, slower, more tenderly, its pulse measured now not just in bells and tides, but in the creak of a floorboard laid straight, in the steam rising from a kettle at dawn, in the weight of a hand resting on a shoulder in shared silence. The river flows on, indifferent and faithful, carrying ash downstream, until it becomes silt, until it feeds the roots of trees, whose leaves will one day shade new gardens. And on its banks, life returns not with fanfare, but with rhythm, the low murmur of voices planning a roof, the clink of mugs passed around a fire, the soft thud of a loaf placed on a wooden table, its crust still warm, its scent rising like a promise kept. And in these gestures, in this repetition, the city rebuilds itself, not as a fortress against loss, but as a home that knows how to hold both joy and sorrow in the same room, like light and shadow sharing a single wall. If you have walked with us through these streets of ember and ash, through the whisper of sparks and the weight of return, know that your presence has been part of this night's vigil, not as a spectator, but as a companion, another quiet light in the constellation of those who remember. And if you wish, you may share where in time or where in the world you are listening from, whether you are curled beneath a blanket in a room lit by electric light, or lying in a cabin where the wind hums through the trees, or drifting in that tender space between waking and sleep, and I will hold your presence gently, like a lantern kept burning through the night. And if you would like to return for another journey through history and dreams, to walk the stone-paved streets of ancient Babylon as the stars emerge, to stand beside Hypatia in the quiet halls of the Library of Alexandria, to hear the whispers of Viking longships cutting through the northern mist, follow this channel. For there is no urgency here, no demand, only an open door and a promise that when you are ready, another story will be waiting, told in the same calm voice, the same steady rhythm, the same belief that history is not just about what happened, but about how we carry it, how we live beside it, how we let it shape us without breaking us. For now, let your breath slow. Let your thoughts settle like dust on a sunlit sill. Let the weight of the day soften into the quiet strength of the night. And remember, cities burn, yes, but they also rise not because they forget the fire, but because they learn to build beside its memory, brick by brick, breath by breath, heart by heart. And as you close your eyes, know that somewhere, even now, a lantern still burns on a hook outside a half-built door, its flame steady, its light small but unbroken, a quiet testament to the fact that as long as there are hands willing to hold, to shape, to return London, and all the cities like it, we'll keep breathing, we'll keep dreaming, we'll keep rising, not in spite of the dark, but because of the light we choose, again and again, to carry within it.